It's mostly military people or people from all walks of
All.
life?
All walks of life.
All walks of life.
So
Hmm.
so far we've only had one military guest, and that was Scott,
Okay.
and he was our guest for the sadness and depression episode. But your two friends that we've had on, they haven't been vets, right?
Yeah, both are college students. One's married, other one's single. Um, yeah, just normal, regular people. Okay. So if we're ready, I guess we'll start.
I hit record, so it is
Cool.
good to go.
All right. So start with the opening. Hey, bro, what's up? I'm Vin,
I'm Jeff.
I'm Don.
and welcome to our podcast. This week is going to be about grief, shame, and guilt, and we have our guest Don. Don, if you
Hello.
would like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Don. I'm Jeff's father-in-law, and I was a retired police officer. That's what I uh,
Thank you
did.
for your service.
That's what I did the vast majority of my life. So,
Sure.
uh,
So we'll have our quote of the week. Don, would you like to read it off?
yeah, we'll start with this one where it says, "Guilt is a weight that will crush you, whether you deserve it or not." And
And
that was
that's
like by Maureen Johnson.
nice. So when you read that, what are you feeling? What are you thinking?
Uh, yeah, guilt is it's it's a tough subject. Um, Spending years, on the police department, going through many different things. There's so many different topics that I could touch on, and I know that we're limited on time, and we don't have
No.
a lot of a lot of time to touch on a lot of these different things. But um, there's guilt that comes with different people that you meet in the job. When you get a call for an attempted suicide and you end up talking somebody down off a ledge, or you talk them into getting the help that they deserve, and you feel like you did your best job, and you would see that person periodically, um, and then you find out 2 months later you get a call for their same address, and unfortunately they hung themselves in the garage.
Right.
So you feel that guilt pushing down on you, as, did I do everything I could have done, or was this guy just hell-bent on doing this, and there was nothing that I could do to stop it. um,
Right.
But
You
that
didn't
guilt still
deserve.
gets to you.
it weighs very, very heavy on you. And there's many situations like that. um, whether it's a traffic accident, and you're dealing with four victims in one car, and three of them are dead, and you're trying to deal with the backseat passenger without telling them that their other family members have died. Uh, that is another thing that just, it crushes you afterwards, after you're done with, a family of four is now a family of one. um, that, like I said, there's uh, you know point after point that you could do with this. um,
Yeah. You can relate to this quote really well.
Yes, I unfortunately I did lose a partner on the job.
Sorry
Uh,
about that.
he he died in my arms as I was holding him. It took his last
Jesus.
breath, and it it, it took everything out of me. It was hard. Obviously, I had to go through mandatory counseling and all that kind of stuff. But until I was ready to accept what was going on, I buried everything deep down inside of myself, and I told myself I was okay. And I lied to myself for 2.5 years. Um, and yeah, I did. Uh, I did things like, I climbed inside of a bottle for 2.5 years, and alcohol doesn't help
Yeah.
take away that pain. All it
Right.
does is
Amplifies it, if anything.
it does. It definitely amplifies that pain, and you you feel even more guilty by doing that because you're not you're not helping yourself, and that whole feeling of survivor's guilt, uh, it really crushes you. um, and after I got my third different counselor, because sometimes you have to go until you find the right one that fits
Right.
your needs.
Right.
um, and after the third counselor, they finally were able to help me understand that no matter what I did, this was there was nothing that I could do. They, reran the scenario. The state and different departments had broken everything down, and there was nothing I could do to expect the unexpected to happen.
Right.
Um, so it took a while, but I finally got there. Uh, thank God, you know.
Yeah.
So
It does sound like in the beginning, though, you kind of fell into the stigma that a lot of men do, where they feel they have to lie to themselves, tell themselves they're all right, stay that strong, uh, silent, and just kind of like hold it in.
and I will say that I did in my first therapy session. It's hard to sit there and say that I lied my way through it so that I could get back on the street, so I could get back to being a cop. So in my mind, I could get back to normal, and that was I didn't realize I was setting myself up for failure by doing
Right.
that. Um, and that's why I said, after the third therapist, then they can finally see, okay, you know, let's break this whole thing down. There's a lot of underlying reasons, and you don't understand until they walk you through it. That my biggest thing was this officer. I had just got done. I was a field training officer, so I had trained him, and that weighed heavy on my mind too. This this young 21-year-old kid was engaged. He had just bought a house, had a dog. I mean, he thought his life was all ahead of him, and it was taken away in a blink of an eye. Um, so, yeah, there's times, even to this day, even though it's been many, many years, that it gets hard to talk about it, because I can still picture him as he was.
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine how he would have progressed with his family, but
So when you were going through all that, like, how did it affect your relationship with like your family and friends? Like, did you bring them in, or did you kind of push people out?
well, it was tough because probably, let's see, back it up, probably 5 months before that, I had just gotten divorced. So I was single. I didn't have any children. I had my cop friends that I relied on, and they thought they were helping me by saying, "Okay, let's go to the bar. Let's go do this. Let's go do
Yeah.
that." And because I didn't have that intimate family support system at that point in time, it I'm sure that made things harder. Luckily, shortly after that, I met my current wife of 31 years.
31 years.
31
I got
years.
married the year I was born.
Yeah. And with her being a police officer, also, I had somebody to confide in, to talk about things with, somebody that understood exactly what I was going through. So I think, that was God's gift to me, or, whether it was Michael's way of guiding her into my life to help me go through this.
Yeah.
Because there's times where I still feel his presence. I still feel that he does, and I know it's hard to, because we're talking about grief, but there's times that I feel relief
Mm-hmm.
in knowing that he's not forgotten. I mean, we still
Every year,
every year
celebrate.
we hold a vigil, and
That's
you know,
awesome.
so that does help. Everybody does get together and they toast at the same time. I traditionally, we have our little sniffers or brandy glasses and whatnot. I put Diet Coke in mine, and I pour a Coke for him, because he was younger and more fit, so he drank regular Coke. I drank Diet Coke, so we shared that.
So Don, why could you explain like why when your police brothers tried to help you out, try to get you to the bar, go out and do stuff, why didn't that work? Like because I think they thought they could help because they were trying to distract you from all that grief and guilt. So what was the difference between your police brothers and then your partner? Why did your partner help more than your brothers?
By partner, I think he means Stacy.
Michael.
Well, no, he's like, because he's asking how your partner helped you get through it. So are you talking about his wife?
Yeah, romantic. Yeah, yeah, wife. Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, like, why didn't it help when, all your police brothers were, like, getting you out, taking you to the bar and stuff, versus, Stacy helping you get through it?
Because I honestly, I believe that my police officer friends had good intentions.
Mm-hmm.
They thought they were doing the right thing. They thought that they were a support for me, which they were in their own way, but there was no end game. There was no getting past, there was just getting to the next day. And that's all that was. Once, my, once Stacy entered my life, it became, I felt like I could be honest with her, completely and totally honest, because it's much harder to talk to your peers about something like that, because you feel weak, you feel like, and it was difficult, but they have in Washington D.C. they have a police officers Memorial Week that they do every May. So the following year, my department sent me out there, and there's a lot of different seminars that you can attend, and that did help. I was able to talk to people that have gone through the same type of experience, so that helped. Yeah, it's so there was, it was talking with the right people,
Yeah.
to help you get over the situation. And there was countless times for that 2.5 year period that I blamed myself and said, why couldn't it have been me? I had already lived a life.
Lifetime. Yeah.
He was, like I said, engaged. His fiance was a doll. They had, like I said, they had just bought a home. They had a boxer puppy that they just got, and his life was just starting.
Yeah.
And I felt like I had already lived a good portion of my life. Why couldn't it have been me? And so when we talk about survivor's guilt, that, that weighed heavy, because I would have traded places with him in a heartbeat.
Right. So in your eyes, if the roles were reversed in the police force back then, and say you had a police friend that is going through what you had to go through, right? They're going through that grief, going through that shame and guilt. How would you have handled that now? Because obviously they, like, your police friends had the best intentions, but it seemed like it wasn't a good fit. So how would you have gone about if you saw someone going through what you were going through?
Well, first of all, I would get them one-on-one,
Mm-hmm.
and make sure it wasn't in a group setting.
Right.
And I would get them in a place where they were comfortable enough to talk. I would, bare my own soul first,
Yeah.
so that they could feel everything pour out of me.
Right.
And then I would hope at that point in time they would feel comfortable enough to open up to me. Because sometimes hearing what somebody else goes through or has gone through will, help that other person open up.
Yeah. Good. Have you, through the grief, shame, or guilt throughout the years, does it ever make you angry? Did you ever, like, just get mad at yourself, or mad at the situation, mad at life? Like,
Uh,
I'm gonna be surprised if you say yes, because I've never seen you as an angry person.
No, and I wouldn't say angry is the
Hmm.
right word. Maybe
Yeah.
irritated.
Mm.
After you have to sit down and talk to so many people, um, that you only at the beginning you could only share so much because a lot of it your brain is still trying to protect yourself by not reliving that moment.
Right.
Um, and you have different agencies, like I said, from the county jurisdiction, the state, the feds, whatnot. They all review those things to make sure or see if there's anything that could have been done differently.
Yeah.
And um, having experts sit there and tell me that there is nothing that you can do to change that. There's nothing unless you could have a crystal ball.
Right.
Because when everybody tries to be prepared or expect the unexpected to happen,
Hmm.
but when something is so out of the norm and you're in that heightened situation, it's very very difficult. Um, and so trying to recall that, um, I going through the trial experience, because it's not like with a case like that. Normally the trial will take place a year and a half later by the time they get prepared for everything.
Jeez.
And so then you've got to relive that whole thing over again. And you have to look at the family members, meaning the victim's family members.
Right. Right.
Um, and, there's no way that the the guy that did this should have been there's no way he should have been out. I mean, he had blown somebody's head off with a shotgun 7 years before that. He served 2.5 year sentence and he was out. Uh, it's just sometimes the justice system doesn't always work the way
Yeah.
that it should.
Right.
Okay.
Throughout the years, when you feel like you're going through that guilt, you feel like, oh, people go through that all the time, right? The hindsight bias of like, oh my gosh, you didn't do what you expected, right? So you feel like, oh, I could have done something better, but hence, as you said, oh, okay, well, we're not God, we don't know how we can't predict the future. Did you ever feel shame in that? Do you ever feel like you were dishonored, like you felt like, oh, I'm not a good policeman, I'm not a good anywhere, right? Do you ever felt like, oh, I just wasn't good enough?
No, that unfortunately, yeah, that never. The way the situation happened, and it happened so fast that I honestly expected when I got back to Michael, I expected him to be okay. I had played football many times in my life, and
Yeah.
watch people get upended, and they're okay, and uh, not it's a tough situation without trying to lay out the entire thing. But
Sure.
I was able to catch up to, because Michael got a shot off, and he ended up shooting the suspect in the leg, which that enabled me to catch up to his vehicle on foot. And it was a convertible, so I was able to jump in and, then arrest him, get him to stop the car, got him handcuffed, got, got him out, and then I was able to get back over to my partner. The only the only regret is not knowing just how bad it was, because you say to yourself, "Whew, boy, if I would have known then that he had killed my partner,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I would have been able to stop myself from, pulling the trigger. I would have been justified, but at the time, I did everything correctly. Like, I was able to stop him, get him arrested, and get back to render aid to, my fallen partners. So hindsight is a different thing, and thank
Right.
God I didn't know, because I don't know. I mean, I think I know. I still would have just affected the arrest the way that I did. I wouldn't have pulled the trigger, because there was no reason to at that point in time.
Yeah. But we never know how our emotions, right, are in this in the situation. Yeah, we never know how we actually are.
Right, and maybe that's God's way of protecting us, that I didn't know, and that made life a lot easier on me, especially when you see the world that it is today, and just how many cops have to make a decision in a fraction of a second, as what do I do? And that's one thing that I can be proud of, that I didn't do anything that I would have regretted.
You made the right call for that situation in the time. I mean, shame can be a pretty powerful thing, so it is good in hindsight that you came out not really shaming yourself and blaming yourself.
Yeah. And it would have laid more guilt on me.
Right, exactly.
Right.
In life, do you ever compare yourself to others? Like, do you have a standard, or even to your own standard? Do you feel like because being in the police force, you have to hold yourself to this standard, right? So, did you was there a big pressure in the police force for you to be like, okay, I have to hold myself to this standard as a policeman, as a man myself, and then you started having a family. Where did you? How was that for you? Just with holding up standards and
I was lucky that I grew up in a stable household with both parents. My dad was a huge influence on me. For the first 4 years of their marriage, before I was born, he was a police officer. Unfortunately, my mom didn't want him to stay in that, and so she had him get into computer work and work for IBM, and do something different. But he always had that same mentality, and I think I got a lot of my character from my father.
good. Yeah.
So I still feel, even though he has passed on, which is another huge grief topic. That's when you're don't want to, when you're idle, and I hate to use that word idle or whatever, but my dad was, I, to me, there was no greater other than, Jesus himself walking.
Right.
But to me, my dad he was everything.
He set the standard for how you thought
Yes.
a man should be and should act.
Yes.
Even after death.
And, even though my daughter can attest to this one or whatever, like, I can be a major weeper. I can watch a sad movie, or I could read a Hallmark card and get teared up or whatever. And I think, a lot of that is, you bottle things up for so long, and then you get those little kinks or cracks in your armor.
Yep.
And there's nothing to be ashamed of with that. I mean, Jeff knows. Jeff knows.
Yes, I do.
I can be a weeper. And not in a whiny way.
Sure.
But just that flood of emotion that has poured out of me. And I think it's because of all the grief that I had built up and bottled up for so long. And like I said, it wasn't just that one incident. I can, had a 12-year-old girl who was being molested that people didn't, unfortunately, the school and the child protection service didn't believe her.
Wow.
And, she ended up, hanging herself in her basement. And to see a 12-year-old girl do that, and she left a note explaining everything. I wish I would have known about this sooner, that all those little things just add up. And there's times, like, I haven't thought about that in a long time. I don't know why that just popped up in my head.
Right,
but there's so many things that are buried that your mind has a way of protecting itself. And you shield yourself from reliving those experiences. Because otherwise your life would be riddled with grief. And instead, being able to raise, being able to raise a family. And like I said, I've been married for 31 years now. He's going to keep reminding me. But I've got a son who's in the Navy, and a daughter who I don't want to sit here and say she's my everything, because Tony, I don't mean you're not my everything too.
Right.
But being able to hold her hand and protect her and walk her through life and eventually walk her down the aisle. That I feel, I feel like that success has, I've overcome that grief, that guilt, that all that pressure that was bottled up. Not saying that it's not hidden back there, because every April 20th it will pop up, and
but you've learned to live with it throughout your life.
I've learned to live with it, and both my kids have gone to the graveside on the anniversary and have been there with me, and it helps them to understand when they see a brotherhood, when they see multiple people out there at a gravesite in the middle of the night, because you toast at the exact minute. So 12:36 in the morning. Everybody's out there, and so it helped having them understand the brotherhood also.
So, like, you've done very well, like, learning how to cope and get through things in life. Would there be any tips that you could give, men nowadays, and I'm not even going to throw an age on there, young men, old men, middle age, doesn't matter, like ways that they could learn to cope with grief in its many forms?
Yeah, don't be afraid to talk. Don't and like I said, continue searching out the right therapist. Don't give up after the first one didn't work for you. If I would have done that, my whole life would be different. So don't give up. There is somebody out there that can help you, and it may not be a therapist per se. It could be, uh, you know, it could be a neighbor who you bare your soul to. It could be that great uncle that has all this stored up wisdom that you don't know. He doesn't have to be a licensed therapist to be able to help you through a situation. Um, One of the biggest things, or one of the hardest things, is when you finally have to hang up your gun belt, or hang up your spurs, or hang up your backpack from coming back from Afghanistan or whatever. So many people feel that's the end of my life. You feel this a loss of this sense of purpose that you had. You lost a chunk of your identity. And to me, that's why I see that this 22 a day isn't going to end until they get to the core of that problem. Because when people are over there, they have a purpose, they have that identity, they have that brotherhood, they have somebody they can lean on. And then most of them, when they're coming back here, they're coming back to broken homes, they're to God knows what they're coming back to. And those are the people that you just want to reach out and help them, because there's so much guilt and grief that they're suffering that they've blocked out the whole time they were over there. And that's why, even going back to the Vietnam days, there were survivors' guilt back then, to where you do one tour and most of the people, they went home and they were like, I'm done, I'm tapping out. But you had other people that did 4 and 5 tours because of the things they saw, and they couldn't shake it. And those people never got any help. At least now some people are, but you have to be willing to open up and let that monster out. Don't let that monster consume you.
I will say, like, especially with like the Vietnam era, like that generation, there was still that major stigma of going to therapy and getting help. Like,
oh yeah,
they were perceived as weak in their
yes.
eyes, so they avoided it, and they bottled and tried to deal with it in their own way. Which, like, we've touched on that here on the show a couple of times, of like that stigma is finally starting to go away.
Yeah.
it's becoming much more open and acceptable for men to open up about their feelings, go to therapy, talk to a friend, talk to a brother. But it's still not quite where it needs to be,
No.
which is why we still have that 22 a day, where like those are the brothers that and sisters that, you know, they're not getting that help, they're not opening up, and ultimately they choose the out
Yeah.
that there's no coming back from.
Yep. And that is a tough one. And you know, maybe that's one of the things that had helped me through all the different stuff is seeing these people that took their own lives and wishing that you could have been there to hold their hand. I don't want somebody to have regret, you know, looking at me like, boy, I wish I could have done something, you know, why did he have to do that? And, you know, it's just brutal. But I think, you know, Jeff hit it, that people are starting to get to the point where they can feel comfortable, and they're not going to be looked at differently. Like, boy, if I do this, what kind of job am I going to have in the future? And so many people let that be a blockade. So rather than getting help, boy, if I do this and I sign this thing, or if I'm taking medication, or if I'm doing this, I'm not going to be able to carry a gun anymore. So I'm not going to get the help because I don't want to lose that ability. Or I mean, there's so many stepping stones that, you know, we still need to overcome to get pushed through this.
Right.
I don't know if that helps at all.
Of course it does. Yeah.
It does.
Okay. So at this point, we usually each of us gives a little testimony of what we went through of grief, shame, and guilt. Don, you've done uh, you've shared a lot, and hopefully, just going through me and Jeff, and maybe you can open up a little bit more. I'll start it off. Grief. I I was thinking about it while you were talking. Is I am very fortunate that I haven't had to experience much grief yet. The closest one would have been my grandma on my dad's side. Granted, she lived in Minnesota, I live in Texas, and I didn't get to see her much, but I saw her throughout the years. We weren't super close, but she loved me all the same. As a grandson, I loved her as a grandmother. Um, and when the funeral happened, they asked me to come up and give I forgot the word, but give a little memorial to her. So I gave a little speech, and halfway through, I bawled my eyes out. And that was the closest thing to grief I have had recently. So I am not sure how I will react when my mom, my dad, my other grandparents, they pass away, or even like anybody. Yeah, I haven't experienced anything close to you, Don. So I've been really fortunate that I still have all my loved ones still here in my life. So, well, we might have to return back to this in a few years and be like, oh yeah, I went through some hard times. This is how it affected me. But for now, that was the closest to grief, and I yeah, I didn't have, so I was fortunate about that. For shame and guilt, um, growing up, I definitely wasn't the best person, wasn't the best kid. I was very, what's the word? I lashed out a lot, and I didn't,
You were
and I let anger to,
rambunctious.
huh?
You were rambunctious.
Yes, yes, and I made a lot of mistakes, as a lot of kids do. Um, growing up, I definitely felt the guilt and shame of like, oh my God, like I can't believe I did that thing. I can't believe I did that, and I feel bad. But what helped me was if I had done something wrong, I made sure to go back later, years later, and apologize or try to make things right or talk it through. Um, and then I don't regret because I say to myself, kind of what you were saying, Don, is like, did I do my best for everyone that I've felt guilty for, or the in the moment what I felt guilty for? And I say, yeah, I can look back and be like, I've done all I can. I've done my best. I didn't run away. I owned up to it. I acknowledged my wrongdoings, stuff like that. So, um, that's mainly my shame and guilt. I'm trying to think of like what's the most guilty I've ever felt. I Let me see. I I think it was mainly with family. I argued with them a lot, mainly with my dad and my sister. With my dad, I think the worst would came when what did he say? There was this one moment he told we were in this big argument, and at the end he told me he's like, I'm you're I don't think he said you're such a disappointment, something like I'm very disappointed in you or something like that, and that took me out. Like I cried for the next hour, and I apologized to him, and then in a couple of years, I turned myself around, and around like 18 years old, we had talked one day, and he said, "Vin, you're only 18, but I'm proud of you. You've done good. I'm proud of you as my son." And I was like, "Cool." That felt good. And then my sister, we had grown apart. My parents were divorced, so she lived with my mom. I lived with my dad. We grew up very differently. She went to different colleges, and we went to different colleges, and we had very different life experiences. We all came back to Texas. We all lived in the same house for a few years, and we argued every day. It was really bad, and and at some point I realized I was like, no, they're like, why are we arguing? Like sometimes we were on the same page, but we'd still argue, and I'm like, I don't want like it's kind of like this is all we have. This is family. It's like like why are we spending every day arguing? So I really broke down, tried my best. I'm like, hey, let's restart. Let's go from the ground up. How we because we were just misunderstanding each other, and it took a few months. We worked on it, and today we're awesome. We don't really argue at all. We have good communication. We can talk about anything. So that made me feel good of like I thought ahead of like I don't want to grow old and have a dysfunctional family because we just misunderstood each other. So that's mine. That's my experience with grief, shame, and guilt. Jeff?
I've been trying to collect myself to
Sure.
talk about this one.
Yeah. Take your time.
The biggest grief or biggest portion of my life that I felt deep would have been. Now I call him my brother. He was my cousin, but we were 2 years apart. We were brothers. He passed away a few years ago. It was an overdose,
I'm sorry.
and shortly before he passed, like I had talked to him about being a groomsman in my wedding when I got married to
Jeez.
Cass.
Right.
And when I got that phone call, like I almost didn't believe it.
Right.
Like the 5 stages of grief. Like I went straight into denial. Like that's not possible. Like he's not dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I continued to lie to myself up until his memorial service, the wake. And I remember going and I stood in the lobby for like an hour, hour and a half. I couldn't bring myself to enter the room where the casket was. And Cass was there with me. She stayed by my side, and eventually my dad walked out, like saw me there. He talked to me for a couple of minutes, and he's like, "So you're gonna go in there?" And I looked him in the eye and said, I can't walk in there." And my dad was like, "I understand, but it is something you need to do. You need to be able to say goodbye."
Yeah.
and like the tears started falling. Like I couldn't contain. I just looked. I looked. At it, I said, I can't do it. So he ended up grabbing me and kind of shuffling me towards the room. And as soon as we rounded the corner and I saw the casket and I saw his corpse in the casket, I lost all control. I lost all composure. I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. I couldn't see because tears just kept falling. Because of all my family members, besides my father and my older sister, like, there was no one in this world closer to me.
Yeah.
And I still keep his memorial card here on my desk. I look at it all the time. I know he's looking down, but that was the hardest death in my life. And I don't think there will be a harder one until my father goes.
Yeah.
Or you. So don't die on me.
Or Nez.
Yeah, I felt a lot of grief with that. It took me a very long time to cope with it. But I also had a lot of guilt because I didn't know that his addiction had gotten that bad. Like, I had heard from other family members that he had turned to drugs and, he had been struggling, but I had also heard he'd been going to rehab, he'd been trying to turn his life around, he wanted to
Yeah.
get a good job. But like I felt very, very guilty and ashamed of myself for not being in better contact with him to stay informed, to know that he was struggling that bad.
Yeah.
And it did take a few years, probably a year and a half, 2 years, for me to really come to terms with, communication's a two-way street. Like, yes, I could have made more of an effort, but so could he have. And that's not blaming him whatsoever. It's just I learned to stop beating myself up as much as I was. Do I still have regrets? To this day, yes. But I don't fully blame myself for not taking that step to reach out anymore.
Right. I'm sorry, man.
It was a rough time.
It was
Yeah,
a rough.
'cause-
It was a very rough time. Watched you go through it, and at that point in time, you understood that I grew up in a household of 6. I had 3 siblings and my mom and dad, so there was 6 of us in a small ranch. Back then that's was commonplace, and it's hard to imagine. I lost my sister when she was 45 to a heart attack, and I lost my brother at the age of 42 to an overdose. So I still have my mom and my one sister, but half of the core root of your family that you grew up
It's
with
gone.
is gone, and
Yeah.
it's hard for whether it's a family function or whatever it is, and it's strange that usually families only get together if there's a wedding or a funeral. There's never any in between where they can get together and they can talk about these things. And one of the things that my daughter Cassidy used to love was listening to my father and his aunt, which was my great aunt, Cassidy's great great aunt, because they would tell stories from the past, back to the Depression era, and like everything that they did when they grew up on a farm in southern Illinois. But Cass, when even though she was 7, 8, 9, she would listen to these stories in awe that their recall and talking about, like you just mentioned, your cousin who was like your brother and whatnot. And my dad also lost his brother to cirrhosis at the age of 34. He lost his mother at the age of 41. I you know he it was kind of like life kept repeating itself there. So we had that, that in common. So yeah, losing a sibling, that, especially my sister, because we were only a year and a half apart, and we did, growing up, we did everything together. From double dates to whatever. So that again, trying to make sense of that is just,
Yeah.
it doesn't, it's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, but there are definitely ways to cope. For me, a big one, just like you, when Michael had passed, was therapy. Like, I went through 2 therapists, not 3, but I went through 2 different ones before I found the right one, and it definitely helped a lot. And I don't know if it was because, like, whether you want to look at it as talking to a professional, or the way I looked at it as, I am talking to a complete stranger who has no bias to the situation. They are completely on the outside and just hearing my story and giving intake and all that on it. Like, that was a big one for me. Vin, I know you've got some other like tips and stuff to kind of help.
Yeah. Take care of yourself. Try your best. Like when you're going through the grief, usually goes into sadness and depression as well. Just do the little things that make you feel better. Try to. Some people just don't brush their teeth, or they don't shower in a while. They don't make their bed. So do those little things to just kind of take care of yourself. Take those little wins. Um, don't isolate. Like obviously you're gonna be alone a lot of times with your grief, but at some point, go reach out, go talk to someone. As Don said, someone that like can genuinely care for you one on one. If it's a loved one, if it's your best friend, um, try to distract, try to find a focus, like a project you can do, or go like work out or do your best hobby like gaming or something like that. Um, Remember the person, like these guys have been talking about. They keep a memorial. They still remember. And for Don, every year doing a remembrance for the fallen loved ones. Um, for guilt, accept responsibility. Kind of what I've said was just like take ownership, acknowledge like okay, everyone makes mistakes. Kind of suck up your pride and just be like, okay, let me go and apologize, even if it doesn't turn out well. At least I know that I've done the best I can. And at the end, just self compassion. Just be like, hey, if you've done the best you can, that's all that. That's all that matters, right? That's one of my mantras. It's like if you've done the best you can, that's kind of all that matters. So,
Continue
any
striving to
other?
do your best and make every day a little better than the last.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay. If we have nothing else, then we can wrap this up. Today was the grief, shame, and guilt chapter. Next week we'll talk about anxiety. Jeff, if you want to go with the motto.
All right. So don't forget, we do have our Discord server. It is the Brothers Bonfire. If you're wanting a community, a band of brothers that are going through similar experiences as you, then come join us on our journey and take a seat at the bonfire. Our Discord link will be in the About section on our Spotify. It will also be below us in the About section and description on YouTube. All are welcome, so come join us at the fire.
Along with uploading every Wednesday, we're also streaming the podcast every Sunday at 7 p.m. So come hang out with us after the podcast. The stream is a safe space for anyone to just chill, hang, and chat about anything. Take care, guys, and thank you so much, Don, for being our
All
guest
right.
today.
Take care. Thank you.